A lot of people stay in jobs that they don't want to be in because they create a lifestyle for themselves that is overleveraged.
We go into a justification loop of like, I've worked so hard to make this money, I should enjoy it. We've lost the ability to be honest with the fact that like we don't even like this work in the first place.
It would be difficult for them to leave, and in order for them to leave it, they would have to let go of a bunch of shit. A lot of people stay in jobs that they don't want to be in because they create a lifestyle for themselves that is overleveraged.
Tell me more.
What we were just talking about before we went on air.
Your dating history?
We're talking a little bit about my dating history. Like growing up, I grew up in rural Alberta in Canada.
Where is Alberta for all the people who have no fucking clue what the fucking Alberta is?
So you got Canada, right smack in the middle, Saskatchewan to one side, BC on the other. It's like oil field money in Alberta. Mm-hmm. So growing up, a lot of the guys that I went to school with that were in my communities and like, you know, outside the community would go away to work on the rigs. They'd work in the oil field. They would make a shitload of money. You're 18 years old making at least 6 figures a year. Nobody knows what to do with that money at 18 years old. So they would go buy trucks, buy toys, boats, all of this shit.
Yeah.
Get sucked into this lifestyle, and you hated it.
So before we continue, because I think this will lead to greater points in the conversation around that concept, what is the cost of living in Alberta? Just so people know, because like 6 figures in New York City is not money. And I say that in like the most respectful way. You make $120K a year, you're poor.
Yeah.
I say that kindly to give context to the listener.
I mean, back then rent was cheaper compared to now, like
what
decade
was
ago.
rent in Alberta when you were growing up? Like even as recently as a few years ago.
My mortgage back home was like just slightly over $1,000 a month.
Okay, cool. So
and for a 3-4 bedroom house, huge yard, double car garage, you could probably pay like $2K a month for a mortgage.
Got it. So you're someone who's paying $2K a month for all in on a home, making let's say $10K a month, which after taxes equates to about $7,500 a month, which is very comfortable to live in for the average person.
But then that same person starts buying like a truck, which becomes a like $800 to $1,000 a month investment and payment. Then they buy a boat, which is another $5,000. So like $1,500 a month just between a truck and a boat. Then because you like in rural Alberta, what do? You dirt bike, you skidoo, you quad in the summer. So then you start buying all these other toys. It's like $5K here, $10K here on this. And you just accumulate all this shit. And then people would get stuck working away in a job that they can't stand because they created a lifestyle for themselves that they couldn't financially afford to pivot and shift gears, which kind of what we were talking to is how many people stay in jobs they hate because they create a lifestyle for themselves that financially it would be difficult for them to leave. And in order for them to leave it, they would have to let go of a bunch of shit. Keeping up with the Joneses.
I think a lot of people struggle to be honest with themselves around their job. And like to give the magnified version of this, I have met people personally who've worked in New York City in finance. A very common path for people is they go down the path of investment banking. So you can make, let's lowball it, $250,000 to $300K a year. Let's lowball. And I have friends who've made more than that their first year. They've made that probably in the first quarter, to be honest with you. But $300K a year is $25,000 a month. Okay. Let's say after taxes, you're netting 13 and your cost of living is 5. You feel like you're fucking balling. So you get the car, you got the flights, going out to dinner, swiping the Amex like a reckless human being. And part of what I think happens for people is we go into a justification loop of like, I've worked so hard to make this money, I should enjoy it. And we already, we've lost the ability to be honest with the fact that like we don't even like this work in the first place. we're just doing it for the money. And so many people get caught in this idea of, I need to make money in order to be worthy of whatever relationships, items, objects, lifestyle, whatever. Because like you said, we're trying to keep up with some image, and we ultimately end up empty. And I think a lot of people are not willing to be honest with themselves that the only reason you work the job you work is because of how well it pays you and what that actually means to you by making all that money. I can tell you from personal experience to a degree that happened. I was 25. I got to be basically made almost twice as much as my first job, and was in almost like a lower end director type role. At least that's how it was presented to me. And I liked the people I worked with. I had no industry experience. I just didn't like the monotony of some of the stuff I was doing, and it seemed almost cooler to me to be able to say I have this cool title and that making pretty much considerably more than all of my friends 2 years out of college, than actually be able to look at it and say, hey, like, I don't fucking like this. Like, this isn't for me. And there was a part of me that had the perception of this is going to be for me because this will lead me to my bigger goals. And in a funny way, it did. I just had to learn that, like, it wasn't getting there through the vehicle of believing your title and your money was worth it, was not the path. And I find so many people have an extremely difficult time being honest with themselves as to why they pursue a role. I have personal friends that I'm aware of will go get an MBA just to go be able to say they make the money, and they're tied to the prestige and the dollar value that is attached to that sheet of paper and to that social stigma. And I'm like, I listen to you and you fucking hate your job. Why are you doing this to yourself?
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm listening and my head is kind of going like a different direction, which isn't uncommon. I'm sitting here listening to this and it's like, hey, you have the camp of people who you pursued a career, a profession, you're in a job that you make really good money, but you don't actually want to be there. Like, you hate what you're doing and it's not fulfilling to you.
Yeah.
Then there's a camp of people that it's like, you're doing this because financially you're kind of fucked and you can't leave your job right now.
What are the reasons they can't leave? I think that's worth the attacking and dissecting.
Yeah, my brain is like going to the path of like, you're a single mom, multiple kids, no financial support from a significant other, and you are working somewhere that basically like you're tolerating where you're at because you have to put food on the table and you have like nobody who is financially supporting you. That is like very real for a lot of people where your situation of being like financially fucked and in a job that you don't want to be in, like there's a lot of very real constraints to what's going on in your life. So I think it's worth noting that, like, there's a camp of people where it's like, dude, you could do something and it would probably be a lot easier for you to find something else. You're just in this career because you don't want to let go of status, all of these things. You're over consuming in a lot of ways, and then you're staying in a job. And then there's also a camp of people where it's like, what do you do if you're that person where it's like, I would love to fucking do something else, but I have so much responsibility and like it's very real that I don't have financial support and help. So I'm just like bootstrapping this to try to figure it out for the foreseeable future. And I don't think people are forever stuck. And I think having the mentality of like, you can't fix something and you can't evolve out of your circumstances, like spiritual suicide to your life. But like there is different camps of people depending on like where you are and the circumstances of your life right now, and what do you do with that?
I don't disagree. I mean, I do think there are people who end up, whether it's circumstance, whether it's how they contributed to it, whether it whatever. I don't think that it's not what you just said is not real. Like a mother who, single mom, ended up in the situation she is. There are probably to a degree some things you can't control in certain cases. Where I find people have the most difficult time is they don't have the humility to figure out how to make the change, right? And even if you're listening and you are the single mom and it's like, I hate my job and equally I have to put food on the table, right? The question then becomes, I agree and I understand, and you have a responsibility to figure out how to make it work, and what is that going to look like? And and I'm sure you've had this experience, there are going to be periods in time of life and periods of your life where you will do things that you do not inherently like, but that's part of the journey of figuring it out. Right? I'm sure everybody who's listening to this at some point has worked a job they didn't like. I don't think everybody's loved their job. And if we only look at it as like a money machine, we will never be happy. Equally, if we don't figure out where we actually want to go, we don't have the means to make the change. And I think from a humility standpoint, people don't have the humility to look at the situation and say, how am I going to change this? And what are the things that I'm going to have to change? Or for many people, their initial perception is, what am I going to have to sacrifice in order to make this happen? And I don't think that's a perfect scenario for everybody. I don't think it ever will be. Yet, you have to have the humility to say, this isn't working for me and what I want. And yes, you may have the responsibility of children. And equally, I will say something that I learned from a friend of mine a long time ago, which was looking back, especially when you have kids, you have a responsibility to set an example for them. You cannot control who they become. They are going to become who they're meant to be. You do have a responsibility to show them what that looks like to the best of your capacities. And kids are very keen to the fact, and they're much smarter than I think parents realize, that if you don't like your job, they can sense it. They can feel it. I can tell you from my own experience when my parents worked something they didn't like and when they do work or do something that they do like. And I understand they made some of the sacrifices they did. And equally, if they didn't make some of the changes they did, maybe my perception would be, oh, work is suffering. My own experience with my parents is work is sometimes taking a step in the right direction, but that also means having the humility to understand what change looks like for you.
My brain's just going down the
rabbit
hole.
Go
right
down
now.
the rabbit hole. Like what? Talk to me. Give it to me straight.
I agree with all of that. I think that when you are, and like I'm specifically thinking of the camp of people where it's like, your situation just fucking sucks, dude. Like, let's call a spade a spade. If you're in that position where you're a single provider, maybe you're in debt, you've had a series of things happen in your life, or like just this present day circumstance that you're in. I think sometimes people like misreading the room. Like, and I like, this is my like hot take with like motivational content and like inspiring content. It's like, you just got to like get up and do the work, bro. It's like, okay, the single mom with like 3 kids that's like bootstrapping 3 jobs right now, like does not need that message. But what I do think is relevant is, you know, how do you show up and put systems in place, remove constraints where you can to make your life easier. And yeah, I'm just feeling about that because I think of like, I've been that broke before and working 3 jobs trying to pay for stuff. And like, I didn't even have kids at that point in my life. Like I've experienced not being able to afford $135 to change out a battery in my car, and the level of frustration you feel when you're in that. And when you're at that place, you have to make, and you said something about sacrifice, but it's like you do have to make sacrifices and you have to say no to a lot of things to put yourself in a position that doesn't have to be forever. And just thinking about people where it's like, you might even work a good job and you're in a situation where financially you feel constraints with what's going on. Like you could work in healthcare, you could be a nurse, you could have like a full rotation where you have the hours, you're making the money, you work for a company. And part of the reason that you feel so frustrated about your job is because like it's not enough for the current financial situation you're in. And some of that I think is what's going on in the world. And I think some of it is also life stuff that just compounds. So where my thought is, it's like, if you're in that, what can somebody do and focus on to like clear the headspace that supports them in like creating true change for themselves? Because like you can't get out of it. Like the situation is fucked. Call it what it is. Like how do you change your perspective to help give you the momentum and the internal fuel to change this so in 12 months, 24 months, you're not in that position
Yeah,
anymore?
I think there's a couple of things, and you and I have talked about this before, not on the show, but in personal conversations. Part of your ability to facilitate a meaningful change, whether in the workplace, whether in your life, whether it's your career, whatever, is what you map your identity to be and what you perceive of yourself. And we cannot outrun our own perception of who we are. That is one thing that you will find with anybody in the work environment. And so if I'm looking at that, I look at conversations that you may have with someone and they're like, oh, it's doomed, or like, I have kids and I have, like I'm in a fuck situation. I can't afford to do this or this. And part of what has to happen is you have to map your identity. Who are you? So if you're a mother, for example, or a father, single, doesn't matter, and you have kids and you're in a fuck situation where you're working a job and you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, part of the question you have to ask yourself is who are you to not only the world around you, but to your kids and to you? And then what does that look like for you, right? I think when you said the internet, like motivation shit, I think that's motivation is very fleeting. When you have a purpose, when you're clear on why and who you are and what you want that to represent, you focus more on the behaviors that lead you down the path. And sometimes that means, hey, I might have kids, I might work a really shitty job, and I might have to try to find a way when I can't get sleep, when I can't do certain things, to work or learn a new skill set, to study, to do whatever that is, because I am someone who figures it out. Something as simple as being able to identify the version of you that you want to be, which is I am someone who figures it out in the midst of difficulty, and what does that actually look like in practice, is probably one of the most powerful things. I'll give you something that happened to me personally. Throughout college, I worked at Chipotle. My senior year of college, I was taking 18 credits for a semester. I was working like 30 hours a week at a bank. And going into that same year, I was also working like 30 hours a week at Chipotle. So I have 2 jobs. That's 60 hours almost per week. Then I'm taking 18 credits. Somewhere in there, I'm having enough time to eat food, train, and then I'm going to bed at like 11 every night and getting up at 4. And that was a large chunk of my life. And then I graduated and I had gone through some things and I was like, isn't this cool? I'm one of the only people around in my friend group who didn't find a quote unquote post-college job. Like working at a bank to me, based on the career path that I chose right out of school, was not. Accounting doesn't lead to banking. Accounting leads to CPA. Accounting leads to, it doesn't, in my head, it didn't lead to that. And I had this moment in May of 2015, where I was like, I have $77,000 of student debt. My base pay as a banking sales job is $1,400 a month. With commission, it can be pretty, but like on base, I'm starting at $1,400. I don't know if you know math, but I lived at home with my parents. God fucking forbid I had to pay for rent for my own place. $1,400 base is not paying my bills. So in that moment, I was like, there's no way out of this. What am I going to do? And again, I had no responsibility of kids. I had no responsibility of being a business owner. I had no responsibility of a significant other. I remember sitting there and I'm like, life's only going to give me more responsibility. And I have no idea how the fuck I'm going to figure it out with living at home. That was quite literally a thought that I had in my head. And then the question became, who do I need to become? How am I going to be that way? And I think if you're listening to this, a lot of people will tell you it's too late. 22 is too late. There's people who are younger who are listening to this. 50 is too late. 70 is too late. It's never too late. The story you're telling yourself is too late. Mm. And I think part of it is you have to make a decision to be like, who am I? I'll give you an example. Why do you drink water?
Because it hydrates me and I prefer it.
Why do you brush your teeth?
So my teeth don't rot and fall out of my head.
Do you think about those 2 statements every time you drink water and brush your teeth? Cool. It's just what you are. It's just what you need to do to take care of yourself. If you learn to map your identity towards I just am because, and these are the things that are happening as a byproduct, you will solve so many of your problems. It won't be overnight. You didn't start brushing your teeth out the womb and just It's not how it worked out. He didn't come out the womb and just drink water and be like, oh, I know I should drink water. It's the practice. And I think if you're listening to this, it's not too late, one. And then two, you need to figure out who you are. And what is that going to look like in how you carry yourself and how you operate? Eventually, it goes from, I need to drink water to hydrate, to drinking water is just a thing I do. It's just part of it. Does someone have to tell you to sleep?
No.
Why do you sleep?
Need rest.
Awesome. Do you tell yourself that every time you go to bed, I need rest, or is it just part of what you do?
Mm-hmm.
If you started thinking about your life as a byproduct of what you want to be, the behaviors will kind of settle themselves. And that is something that I find so many people miss. It's like, why are you in great shape? I eat protein and I lift weights and I do this. And that's like, cool. Do you have to think about, I need to eat protein and lift weights all of the fucking time in order to become? No, it just eventually became something you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think figuring out what that looks like for you is an important skill to develop.
That makes sense.
What do you got?
Just listening to it probably like deepen my feels about it for people.
What? So, what comes up?
You're gonna make me cry on the podcast.
Good. We love tears on the show.
I just feel for people. It's hard as shit when you're in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not comfortable.
No. Like, I get it. I've done it. I've done the thing of like change your like situation, change your identity, like map to what those things are. I just feel for people when they go through it.
What was
it's challenging.
What was the most challenging thing for you in your experience?
Moment. I think you have these like moments when you're in it where very simple things that you should be able to like, that you want to be able to do or you want to be able to provide for yourself are just challenging. Like, I think of people where it's like you're struggling financially and you have to, you're like timing paychecks to pay your bills, make this payment. Some outlier thing comes out of nowhere and like that $300 bill that you get is $300 that was not accounted for, that you were like, what the fuck? Like, I don't have an additional $300 right now. And when you're in it and you're like that deep in something, like $300 today is like, that seems like minuscule compared to like when you're in it. You have no space to call in sick, miss shifts, not pick up stuff, not work overtime, do all these things to create opportunities to and the financial resources, and you can get yourself out of it. But like anybody who tells you that it isn't absolutely exhausting while you're going through it has like never been fucking that broke with that level of like responsibility. Like read a room.
Yes. I 100%
That's how I
agree.
feel about it. Part of the emotion is probably like thinking back to like, I just feel for other people because like I've lived it and I've experienced that degree of challenge at times. Like I remember being so broke that I drove a truck in the middle of Canadian winter with no fucking heat and had to wear fucking snow pants like in the vehicle and like beanie, mitts, scarf, wrap up, winter jacket to drive 45 minutes to go to a job in another city and like pray to God that, you know, the cold air blowing up in the windshield was enough to keep it from like frosting over. So I think about like that. I'm just like, oof.
What kept you going?
I'm fucking stubborn.
Sure.
I have this like core belief in life that I've just, if I keep showing up when most people would quit, that I will eventually break through. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I'm going to do the things, I'm going to course correct, I'm going to adjust, I'm going to make it better. But like ultimately, the only way I fail is if I get out of the arena.
What taught you that?
I don't know, probably sheer volume of challenges throughout my life.
Is there anything you ever went through that ultimately ended up not working out in some form or fashion?
I don't really look at anything through that lens, so nothing comes up for me in that sense. Anytime I've ever committed to like creating a breakthrough in life, I've always been able to facilitate that. It might have taken me longer than I wanted it to.
Sure.
But like eventually I've always been able to create that change from continuing to like show up and work through it. I just like feel for people. Like you got to make decisions at that point that like you don't want to make, that are uncomfortable. You're talking about changing your identity and having like the humility to do things to create a better situation for yourself. It's difficult when you're in it. I remember being like financially independent as like a young female to like financially fucked in like 6 months from like poor decisions and having to move out of a main floor, like this place that I was living in by myself that I could afford with my dog, bailing on the lease a month out before it, and like forfeiting the damage deposit because it was like, it is worth it for me to lose the damage deposit to get out of this early, because an opportunity came up for me to move into like this unfinished basement suite for $500 a month. And it would have cut my living costs by $800 a month. And at that point in my life, eating a damage deposit
Was worth it.
Was worth it for $800 off of my cost every month for like the next year. And I think of like those moments, and I know that there's people out there that's like, you work your fucking ass off and you're like doing the best you can to like bootstrap through your situation. And like, sometimes it's just difficult. And like, yes, there's a path and you can work towards it and you can do all those things to make it better for yourself long term. But that doesn't take away the like just the sheer volume of difficulty doing it. Didn't realize I was going to cry about that, clearly.
We love a good emotional experience, don't we?
Clearly,
Man, that's like the third. It's like the third one today.
Yeah.
It's good.
I feel for people. And like, you don't know, like, we're not taught good habits with our money. So many times we have to learn stuff about money the hard way. Over leverage, spend too much, don't think it through, create debt for ourselves, have to pay off the debt. Like, for those who like don't experience that hardship, like fucking awesome. Like, good for you, dude. You are like an anomaly compared to most people. Like, we're not taught this stuff.
How many people have you met that are exceedingly successful who haven't experienced hardship?
Probably none. Yeah. Took this episode a whole different route, but
At
that's
times
what's
it's
on my
genuine.
heart to
It's
talk
good.
about
Speak
right
from the
now.
heart.
Yeah, I think sometimes we come from the angle of like, people hate their jobs. And sometimes people hate their jobs because it's like, you genuinely don't want to be doing this, but you have to put food on your table and pay your rent. And the goal is to create a future for yourself that you can do something that you love, and you've alleviated a lot of that pressure. And how do you show up in the current job you have and make the most of it and be your best self and be a leader and like show up responsibly and be a role model to people around you. But like, good God, is that fucking difficult sometimes when you're going through it.
Yeah, of course. When you were going through it, were you aware of what you wanted? Like, hey, this sucks and this is fucking horrid, and I'm still clear on the fact that this is not what I want, and I have a sense of what I do want. I'm just not there yet.
Yeah, 100%.
I think what you alluded to is something that a lot of people who figure it out actually have, which is you are clear on what you do want it to look like. And so your tolerance for a struggle and your understanding of the responsibility you have to figure it out based on the constraints you are in is there. And when we are clear on where we want to go, it is disproportionately easier to stomach the discomfort, because it's not the discomfort that holds on to us. The clarity of where we're going, like the purpose of it, that's what you're working towards, and figuring out what that looks like for you. Going to what we said earlier, where it's like, who are you? That identity thing. This process is so much more tolerable when you have a belief in where you actually want to go and you understand what that is.
Yeah. I think for people who are going through that as well, is oftentimes when you're in it, it can feel very lonely because people around you don't understand and they don't support in that way. And a lot of people don't have the luxury of like having a group of people around them that speaks greatness into them when they currently have minimal belief in themselves and the situation. So I think for anyone listening to this, it's like in that position, it's like you have to believe, even if it is like the tiniest bit, that like there is a different possibility for you. And like it doesn't even have to be this like deep rooted conviction, and that will grow over time. But like I just need you to have a little bit of disbelief that this is the only thing, or like the only thing that's available for you. Just like a fucking smidge that it could be better. Because if you like plant that seed of doubt for somebody, that it's like, if you're able to plant the seed of doubt that I don't have to keep living like this, I don't have to struggle in this way, and there's something else out there for me that is much greater than what I'm currently experiencing, and you can start to fracture your current reality, like then you can create the energy and momentum within yourself to create change.
How long did it take for you, for the audience listening, who feels similarly, like they feel like they're in between a rock and a hard place, which is kind of what you described? How long did it take for you from the time you realized that to the time it actually changed?
Fuck. Like a year and a half of like working my ass off.
18 months.
Yeah.
How old are you?
I'm 30 now.
Okay. So it took less than 6% of your life to get there. It sounds like a long time, and it's not in the grand scheme of things. Mm-hmm. Did it feel like a long time at the time?
Yeah, there was moments. Sometimes I would hit like a rhythm with it and just like dial in and like just rock it out for what needed. But the moments that were difficult were what I was talking about, where it's like you get that $300 bill that like you didn't anticipate, and you're like, holy fuck. You're like making progress and you're in momentum, and then your car battery dies and you're like, fuck. I can't afford to not fix this because this is the thing that gets me to work. But I have no extra money to deal with this.
What was the dialogue like with yourself as you were going through it?
I was just super intense in the sense of like, fuck this. I don't want to live like this. I will work harder and longer, and I'll just like rock this out. Like, but whenever I get into challenge, that is oftentimes my internal dialogue is like, I almost get like mad about the situation I'm in, and then I would just like work harder to like whatever that was at that point in time.
Do you feel like people don't do that, and that's why they end up stuck for longer than they need to be?
Yeah. I think it's really easy to, this might be like a really toxic take, and it might
go off.
You know, in the future, I'll think back and be like, that could have been like a more evolved expression. But like, I think that there is value in just getting fucking pissed about where you are when you are at a point in your life where the odds are stacked against you. And I think sometimes anger in that moment and just like this ruthlessness to solve the problem is a better energy than, oh, I'll do it if it feels good. Like light and
100%.
dark energy. Like I think you dig the fuck in and you just run 100 miles an hour. And I think at some point you need to shift out of that or it becomes like very exhaustive. But I think it's a lot easier to get into massive momentum when the odds are stacked against you, especially if you've never developed that skill out of like rage and anger for your situation.
I think you have to learn how to channel the darkness into light. I think that's ultimately the thing you have to learn. Otherwise, on the other extreme of it, it's burnout. But it's very difficult, I find, for people to learn how to channel into light until they've learned to become friends with their darkness. There is no fun in sitting there and being like, I don't have the things I want. My life doesn't look the way I want it to look like. And I'm not in the space that I want to be in. There's nothing fun about it. And if there's not a compelling future, a light at the end of the tunnel, not a fuck everybody, but like there's beautiful and there's more for me and I believe in that. That dark won't go into to more lightness. It will go dark into more darkness, which might change your situation, but it will not change your perception.
Yeah. I think for me, when I got into like that energy and I got into momentum, like many things, I think gamifying stuff helps. So this moment of like, I don't want to live like this any fucking more. I'm cutting off from everything that isn't like this forward path, and you make that decision. I think it's okay if like anger is the thing that moves you off the starting line to like get you going.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
I think how you sustain that is like you gamify it and you turn it into
Joy.
how do I do this faster? Okay, I have this benchmark. Like I'm going to pay off like this debt. I'm going to set a target to do it in like 60 days. What if you do it in 45? And then all of a sudden, like you just get into this crazy state of momentum where everything starts to compound because what got you off the starting line was anger. But what kept you going was the momentum and like feeling like you were winning and creating success for yourself and focused on, I think, like checking off the boxes, like doing the thing. I'm getting closer and closer to the end target. And I think we all have moments where it's like a crossroad where it's like, I don't want to live like this anymore. And I think there's like varying degrees of it within a journey when you're trying to create change for yourself.
Do you think everybody has to go through a pretty extreme level of pain?
I mean, I wish they didn't, but I think a lot of people, like, it's got to hurt. Like, the pain of staying the same has to exceed the pain of change. And I think for everybody, that is a sliding scale. I think some people's, I don't want to tolerate this, like, their tolerance for pain is shorter, so they will move into action faster. But I think that's like, you have to make a decision that, like, I don't want to live like this anymore. I think that's where people start. I think you eventually get to a place where you're like, I'm just doing this because I love it and I want to create and I want to see what's possible for me. But until you've probably created like a deep level of change in your life from fuck this, like I don't want to live like this anymore, like you can't even begin to learn what it is like to do something from just joy and love and passion to create.
I agree. I think many people don't learn that lesson early enough in life. And I think for anybody listening, it's better to learn this lesson as early as possible with a reasonable amount of discomfort rather than learning it through the lens of some major life event. Because a lot of people seem not to learn these things until either someone dies, their health goes to shit, there's a divorce or a separation in marriage, there's that's how most people learn. And I can tell you from near death experiences to a degree, it's not worth trying to learn it through that. It's never going to be worth it. And I'm sure you've had to some degree a similar experience multiple times in your life.
I fall into the camp of like pain threshold was
High.
High.
Very. I'm
Like,
high.
my rock bottom would have been a lot at multiple points in my life. Nobody would have
What
got
was your
closer
first?
to it. Oh God. Pretty much overdosing when I was 16.
Mm-hmm.
I was on like an 8-day bender on drugs. Did a little too much on the final day. Got so high, I watched my body melt into the floor and
Oh, you were tripping. I love that for you.
couldn't even put my hand on a wall because I would start to like watch my body like morph into everything. Got so freaked out. I locked myself in a bathroom. It was the first time ever that I wanted to call my parents.
Mm-hmm.
That was never a thought any time prior. I was going to call my mom. My mom's an emergency room nurse, and I was like on the verge of calling her, being like, I think I'm going to die. And didn't call her. Locked myself in a bathroom, puked up 3 sinkfuls of stomach acid, passed out, and woke up 24 hours later. And when I woke up, I was like,
Never again.
how didn't you die? You didn't piss yourself, which is also crazy because how dehydrated were you that you slept for an entire day? Didn't wake up
Night.
in a puddle of your own urine. And I woke up and I was like, I'm never touching drugs again. And I quit cold turkey that day. And I never went to rehab. I never got therapy. And like, that was it. I was done. Spent the next 2 months dealing with some like mental health stuff from doing it. It was difficult, but there was like not a single point that I was going to
Go
relapse,
back.
touch
Yeah.
it, didn't care. Mm-hmm. So that was probably like the first like rock bottom moment in
What was
my
the
life.
next one? So that's 16. You're
Yeah.
30 now. When was the next one?
Abusive relationship, 21.
Okay.
Walked out of that relationship. At that point in my life, the person that I was interacting with was probably extremely nihilistic.
Okay.
And I didn't really, I just like felt myself like fighting for something in a relationship, but like didn't end up leaving. There was some interesting events that happened all within like a short couple day window. I was driving to work. I hit the first red light coming into town. And I remember sitting at that red light. And for months, like I had been like, this person's not right about me. Like, fuck what they're saying. Like, I don't agree. And I was always very like resistant to their commentary about a lot of stuff. And I hit that first red light. And I remember sitting there looking at it. And I was like, maybe he's right about me. And soon as I thought that, I was like, fuck that. Texted my boss and was like, hey, I'm not going to be able to come into work today. Something came up. I'm so sorry. Whipped a U-turn at the red light, drove home, packed up my shit, and moved out that same day. And was like, fuck no. I had spent months being like, you're not right about me. And it was like the first moment that I was like, maybe. U-turn right in the middle of the fucking red light.
Fuck out of here. I'm out.
Packed up, called my friend, car jam-packed to the roof, dog in the front seat. Called my friend, was like, I need a place to live. And he was like, okay, come through. That was the second time.
Next.
Oh, God. We really got to go through all these?
Here's the thing. I think if people can hear and listen to your journey from birth to 30 and where it's led you, I think there's so much value in being able to hear the story.
Next rock bottom moment in my life, I would say I was 23. I'd came back from backpacking for 6 months by myself, which was on the tail end of that abusive relationship. I basically left it, saved up all this money, fucked off to go traveling by myself. I came home from that trip, was team lead, then was a team manager, started trying to build an online business, got into 2 investments with like business coaches, ended up signing these contracts. I ended up like $30K in debt in less than 6-7 months. And I was in a position where my fixed monthly cost from these decisions was about $3K just from like that alone, independent of my rent, my grocery money, all these different things. And like I said, I went from financially independent to like financially fucked. Ended up having to bail out of that lease, move into this unfinished basement suite. I worked a full-time job as a manager. I worked every single weekend in a different city to make up. There's the only weekend job I could get that fit my schedule while trying to build my business. And I like rocked that out for 18 months straight. And I remember I was down to like my last $12 in my bank account, like $12.50. I went to the grocery store. My dad one year for Christmas, the year prior, gave me three $100 bills, and I wrote Millionaire Baby on one of them. And my goal was that I was going to frame this $100 bill, and I was never going to spend it. And that was like, I'm going to make my first million, and I'm going to like frame this. And it was supposed to mean something to me. And I'd spent the other two, and that was the last one left in my wallet. And I went to buy groceries, and I had $12.50 in my bank account. And I remember, this is going to make me cry. I remember pulling it out and giving it to the cashier and just being like, holy fuck. I felt so ashamed. She like read this $100 bill and looked at me, and I was like, that was supposed to like mean something. I got in the car, I drove home, I wrote in my journal, I will never be this fucking broke again. 3 weeks later, I made my first $10,000 in a weekend in my business, and never looked back from that moment. That was some intense shit.
And then the next one. and then
Let's
go to the next one.
I would say the next one was I built TVAC like a psycho. In the first year of TVAC, we went from like one team member to 100 in 12 months. I had $100K payroll 1 month. I drained all the money out of my bank accounts to make it. Sat on a rock by a lake and was like, there's nobody in my life that can give me $100,000 in 3 weeks from now to do this all over again. I didn't want to not pay the team. I was like overwhelmed by just the sheer volume of responsibility at that point in my life. I ended up managing to pull like an additional like $84K out of my ass in the upcoming weeks to make payroll. It was another time. And then a couple years after that, I think I was 27. The business continued to be chaotic, and then I lost my voice. And that was like the final nail in the coffin. It was the one to win them all. I ended up losing my voice for like well over 2 months, and I couldn't talk more than like 15 minutes a day. I was going to speech therapy twice a week. The business was like peak chaos, and I couldn't afford financially or health-wise to not be able to talk. And that was crazy. I remember it like hurt my vocal cords to speak. I thought I had permanent scar tissue damage, that my voice would never be the same. I still have issues with it to this day. I remember sitting in my car, and it's so fucked and it's so crazy because like you don't realize how much we talk until you can't. And you go into a grocery store and someone's like, hey, how was your day? And you just like smile and nod your head because it's like, it hurts. Like, I can't talk to you. And I felt so lonely. So used to being on the phone and talking to people. And then it was just like dead silence. I remember sitting in my car, and my favorite song at the time came on the radio, and I couldn't sing. And I just remember sitting there like looking at the dashboard in my car and was like, you have ran yourself ragged and into the ground and not once like stopped to take care of yourself and make sure that you were good through all of this. And now you are sitting in a grocery store parking lot by yourself, and your favorite song is on the radio, and you can't sing, and nobody fucking knows. And nobody knows because like it is not their responsibility to take care of you. It is your responsibility to, and you self-abandon to make all of these people money without ever once considering like the implications of your own health.
So what changed after the fourth time, since that was the last time? It seems like that is probably the real final time. What changed?
I think it was health. Like we've talked about like death, disease, and divorce. All the other ones were like, oh, that hurts, but like it'll buff out.
Just wax. Let's put a little wax on it.
I'll make more money. I'll get out of this relationship and I'll rebuild my life. That one was like, all I've ever wanted was to speak. Like that was like, this is now, your behavior is now starting to infringe on the thing that you want the most. I remember being 16 and just imagining like long black hair down to my ass in front of a crowd of like 5,000 people, barefoot on stage talking. And that was like a moment where it's like, your behavior is going to ensure that this does not happen.
Ever.
And this is what you want the most. I don't give a shit about anything else. It's like that has been like the vision, and like I don't have to close my eyes to like feel it or smell it. And I didn't at 16 and I don't have to now. So for me it was like, this behavior is going to cost you this. Yeah. It was like, I'm going to make this change because I love myself, not because I hate my situation.
What did you change? What
My
did change
whole
look
existence.
like? Go break it down. You've now, every single thing you've talked about, like you've had a little bit, but this was the biggest change. So what did the change really look like? Go in depth.
I think telling the truth about patterns of behavior that I have, being open to like talking through stuff and expressing, which I did with you. And part of that was like, hey, can you help me with all of this? I had to look at my life and be like, where are you not being responsible? Which is hard when you're like, it like kind of feels hard at first because you're like, well, I've created all this chaos for myself. And the only person who's responsible for it at the end of the day is me. Truly understanding like responsibility, and there's like degrees of it, and then being willing to start to say no to things that like are in direct conflict of that with what you want, being willing to remove stuff and relationships, change your behavior, change the way you spend your time, no matter how uncomfortable it is. Express, work through like all the things that like kept those patterns going in the first place, which has been quite the journey.
What have you learned 3 years later?
Oh, crying is good.
We're doing it
Has
live.
everybody seen me bawl on this episode? I don't think we heal in isolation. We heal in community. We heal when we're able to like openly express to other people and share. I think a lot of what holds us back is we feel so ashamed of ourselves, and at times, and I don't know if this resonates with other people, but for me it was like I was ashamed of like being alive half the time. And I didn't even like consciously realize that that's how I felt. But then all of my behavior mirrored that. But I would have never got to that without having conversations with somebody that like I loved and felt connected to, and was like willing to go there with somebody and look at my own behavior. You say it all the time, but it's like shame can't exist in silence. I think shame is the quietest emotion in the sense that it like robs you of your voice, but it is the loudest in how it screams through your life and through your body.
Shame only exists in silence. It doesn't exist in expression.
What do you say? What was your old Instagram bio?
Evolving through expression.
Evolving through expression.
Yep. You have to learn to go through your expression and be okay with the fact that it's not about being right. It's a lot about learning what is right for you. People don't delineate those two things. We're more married to being right than we are doing right and being right for us. And that goes in all aspects. That's personal relationships. That's your health. That's your business. I've had, like, for people listening, I've had like a first class seat to your health, your personal well-being, and business. It's quite the experience to be involved in all three. And to the degree in which you've willingly let go of trying to be right in each is to the degree in which it's changed quickly. I remember you came and asked for help with your fitness, and I was like, cool, we're going to do like 1/8 of what we're going to do, and you just checked out for a year. You couldn't even believe that it was going to be that little. Even when we had conversations around the business, it was like, these are the three things we're going to do. Remember, like, I remember the first time we talked about business stuff, you kind of like looked at me as like, that's all you're going to offer me? And I was like, yeah, I have nothing else to offer you. What the fuck are you looking at me crazy for? There are often very simple changes we can make that have like 2, 3, 5 year cascades that you can, like you said, you can condense decades into years, years into months, months into weeks, and weeks into moments. And if you're listening and you're in a part of your life that it's like, fuck, there is no way out. The thing is, whether you believe it or you don't believe it, it will be true for you. If you don't believe things will change, that'll be true. If you believe it'll change, it will be true. You need to map downstream what that looks like in the simplest manner to create the change. Change is not this esoteric idea that is so far out of reach. It starts with very little things. And I think you would agree from experience, it's better to realize that without having to go through life. Now, ironically, most people, myself included to a degree, had to learn that way. I think it wrung me very painfully to hear a doctor be like, we have no idea how your mom's alive. I don't even know how she got to fucking urgent care. But this is what probably should have happened, so she's lucky. I don't think it should take till life's on you for you to learn a lesson. And if you are going through a really difficult time right now, part of the process for you is find a way to practice gratitude. You can't change without it. If you're not grateful for where you are in this moment, there's no changing it. You couldn't become the person you are and get to this space now if you didn't, to figure out that you needed to change. What a great episode. So anyways, if you hate your job...
Woo!
No, but the stories are will relate. There's people who've probably gone through some degree of what you just expressed in their job, in their career.
I think sometimes that God, the universe creator, just speaks through you. We came in here with one agenda. My body went, no, we're going to talk about this instead.
We're going to go into this as a byproduct of the original topic. Yeah. You got to learn how to have the humility to see things, see truth.
Yeah, I think my biggest end point for this for people is as somebody who has experienced rock bottom many times in my life, there's always hope. And it always, it can get better. And you can change your circumstance. And sometimes when you're in it, you're like, holy fuck, it feels like the dirt is coming in the hill faster than you can shovel it out. And just breathe. It will be okay. And I said, if all you can do is create a fracture in the belief that it can't change, you don't even have to be convicted or fully confident in it. If you can just doubt for a second that this doesn't have to be the way that I live the rest of my life, that is enough to start and get you into momentum. I find it so interesting. And this really resonates with me. When you look at people who are struggling and they're drowning and you're like, what's your vision? Motherfucker, here's my vision. To breathe. To be able to get my head above water. How about you focus on helping me alleviate some of the steam and pressure out of the pot. And then we can talk about like where I actually want to go. Because right now, the only thing I can focus on is the next 2 feet in front of me. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you're in that it's okay that you just focus on those 2 feet in front of you.
Simple. Don't try to create Disney when you can barely pay your bills.
Yeah. 2 feet, you can hike your ass right up in a mountain. I did that. I was in Everest Base Camp. I'll like end with this. When I trekked Everest Base Camp, I got altitude sickness and I was sick as a dog and was like coughing up blood on the side of the mountain. And I remember being at the bottom of this mountain on our hike back and looking up and starting to get a panic attack. So I was like, I can't fucking hike that for another hour. I was so fatigued and exhausted. And I'm like spitting up blood on the side of the road. And like the only way out is like medevac. I'm getting in a helicopter or I'm like trekking out for 5 days. Like there's no in between. And I focused on 2 feet in front of me. I couldn't tell you a single person's face that I passed on that mountain walking up for an hour. And it was like 2 feet at a time. And then all of a sudden I got to the top of the mountain. And I remember it was like we could take a break for lunch and standing there. And I just started bawling. And it was just this moment for me in my life of if I can do that, I can do anything because my mind wanted to quit before my body was going to. And whenever I get overwhelmed, I'm like, what is the next 2 feet in front of me? If I can just like tackle this. And then I just take it 2 feet at a time. And I think that's what we need when we're overwhelmed in a situation. You don't need to look at the whole mountain. You need to look at what can I get done right now and what is like this next 2 feet.
Yeah.
That's what I got.
Love it.
So I guess like, subscribe, comment.
We'll see you in the next one.